For Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to rise this evening and to follow up on a question I first asked in this place on November 23rd, 2018, regarding high-speed internet for rural communities. Certainly my riding of Perth Wellington is one of those ridings where we have some pockets, too many pockets, where it's still impossible for families, for small businesses, and for local farmers and farm businesses to access high-speed, reliable internet. In 2019, it is completely unacceptable that so many Canadians still lack reliable high-speed internet. Now, at the time that I originally asked my question, back in November 2018, the Auditor General's report had just come out. The Auditor General's report entitled Reporting on Connectivity in Rural and Remote Areas. And in that report, it said this, quote, "Many detailed examinations of the state of broadband access in Canada have recommended that the federal government lead the creation of a national broadband strategy. However, the government has not agreed to take that step. Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, ISED, the department, knew the extent of broadband access across the country and had programs and other initiatives focusing on internet access in rural and remote areas. However, we found that it did not have a strategy in place to improve access for almost 3.7 million Canadians." Now, Mr. Speaker, that report simply confirmed what the people in Perth Wellington already knew, that the government is failing rural Canadians when it comes to rural high-speed internet. We live in a world that's dependent on effective, on reliable high-speed internet. It's no longer a luxury. It's a necessity. It's a necessity for those who live in our riding. I unfortunately know too many in my riding who have to rely on two separate internet providers in order to ensure that they have internet when they need it. And it's frustrating for families, for farmers, for small business owners when they do not have the access to small businesses. Now, I know the government will try to tout some of its past programs, like its Connect to Innovate program. But Mr. Speaker, here's the facts. In my riding alone, I know of at least 4 projects that have been waiting since fall of 2016 to hear back on their applications, one way or the other, either positively or rejection. November 2016, these applications were due, but yet we still don't have the results one way or the other. That's unacceptable for the small local ISPs in my riding that are trying to do their best to provide high-speed internet for their communities. In fact, one of my local service providers in my home community has on their own been able to put high-speed internet fiber to each farm, business, and household within their ILEC, within their local incumbent local exchange carrier. They've done that. But to expand beyond that to the areas where the big telecom companies have failed to bring fiber, in communities across Perth Wellington where they don't have fiber internet, they can't do so because this government is failing to act on that matter. I want to highlight some of the local initiatives that have gone so much. SWIFT Initiative, for example, who's working to bring high-speed internet across the community. Services, organizations like the Wellington County Library, which are now lending mobile hotspots. It's one of their most common and most well-used products is lending high-speed internet mobile hotspots so that families can have access to high-speed internet. But yet this government comes out with no meaningful plan. They come out with a 2030 plan, but yet has no resources to actually connect rural Canadians to high-speed internet. So I want to ask this government again, why are they failing rural Canadians when it comes to high-speed internet?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Rural Economic Development.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, puis merci, mon collègue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague, the member for Perth Wellington.
Government has a plan, and we've put resources to that plan. Our government is committed to the needs of rural Canada. When the government develops a plan on the infrastructure, the Investment to Canada plan, and design these objectives in mind. Le plan a été conçu pour...
The plan was developed to invest in the economy to help Canada transition to a green economy and also to help the middle class and those working hard to join it. No.
Offer through 5 dedicated investment streams, the Rural Economic Development for Communities, and in fact, the plan includes $2 billion to dedicated fund for rural and northern communities. Monsieur le Président, nous avons également
Mr. Speaker, we have also increased our support for infrastructure projects whose costs are shared with territories and Indigenous communities. And in order to support small communities with fewer than 5,000 inhabitants, the share of the federal government in this shared cost initiative would pass from 30 to 60%.
The federal share of projects funding can be up to 75%. Mr. Speaker, since Minister Jordan's appointment, Canada's new Minister of Rural Economic Development has been hard at work meeting with Canadians in communities across the country. We are meeting and engaging with members of these rural communities to hear them and find out with their communities how they can succeed and thrive. We are examining what we heard and work with other departments as a whole government approach to develop a broader strategy that will support rural economic development all across Canada. Part of the new minister's role of economic development's mandate is to increase high-speed broadband coverage in rural Canada. This will position rural Canada for the success of the digital economy. Access to high-speed internet is critically important to the success of large and medium businesses. We know that regardless of where you live, high-speed internet needed in order to get Canadian products to global market. I said, Internet.
Reliable high-speed internet service would allow Canadians in rural regions to have better access to health services, education, and government. This would also help them remain connected with their friends and family the world over.
Mr. Speaker, includes our commitment to ensure that all Canadians have access by 2030, as the member mentioned, but also significant investments in broadband infrastructure will connect 90% of households by 2021. Our government is leveraging the funding from a number of sources to meet that commitment. Also, we have Universal Broadband Fund, Connect to Innovate program, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, the CRTC, and others. Our government is working closely with the provinces and territories to develop a strategy that will benefit all Canadians. Alors, c'est important que
It's important that we work with provinces and communities to have a strategy that will.
We have put that money in Budget 2019 to look at working closely with the municipalities and the provinces. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member talks about Budget 2019, but we know that Budget 2019 wasn't really a budget. It was a document of distractions. And so they've thrown out figures, they've thrown out numbers, they've thrown out this 2030 date, but yet their plans to date and their efforts to date have largely failed. They talk about the tiny budgets that were promised for 3 years, tiny deficit for 3 years in exchange for infrastructure investments. But in rural Ontario, in rural southern Ontario, we are not seeing those infrastructure investments, particularly when it comes to the importance of digital infrastructure. Rural communities in my riding of Perth Wellington have failed to see any meaningful investment in the digital infrastructure that is necessary for our businesses, our farmers, our farm families, and our agribusinesses to compete on the international scale in the 21st century. This budget did nothing to alleviate those concerns other than promise money, but no plan to get to the 2030. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I think on this side of the House, we have a great deal of caution when it comes to these promises from these Liberals. So again, I go back to my original question. Why has this Liberal government failed to make the necessary investments in digital infrastructure in rural communities over the last 3.5 years?
Secrétaire parlementaire de la...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We have invested in broadband more than any other government has done. I'd like to point out to the member, a lot of the caucus members here advocated to have a minister responsible for rural economic development. I'd like to remind the minister that the previous Harper government cut the rural secretariat in 2012. So we've put now a ministry in place to look at developing a rural strategy, not only developing a strategy, but also looking at putting dollars towards that. And there are significant dollars that are in budget 2019, $1.7 billion that have been added, and we're going to look at further that investment. So yes, it's important. I understand some of the members writing. There are challenges, but there are challenges across the country. But this government has put a plan in place, has put the resources in place, and we're going to look at working with the provinces over the next several years to ensure that we have high-speed internet connected for people and for businesses all across the country. Merci, Monsieur le Président.